You're being evicted. The HOA has voted unanimously. Those sharp words came flying from Sharon Blake, our local HOA president, as she stood smugly in front of my ranch gate, a sly grin plastered across her face. I'd just stepped out to check on my clucking chickens when I spotted her little golf cart parked crookedly on my gravel. Behind her, two HOA board members flanked her like hired muscle, brandishing a notice like it was a royal proclamation. I glanced at the paper. Bold red letters blared, "Notice of termination of tenancy, 30 days to vacate." And my hands shook, not from fear, but from a fire of rage bubbling up inside. This wasn't just a house, it was my family's heartbeat. My father raised cattle here, my mother tended tomatoes out, back until her final day, and my kids took their wobbly first steps on this very soil. Yet here was this HOA board, barely settled in with their shiny electric cars and manicured hedges, thinking they could toss me out like yesterday's trash. I folded the paper, locked eyes with Sharon, and muttered, "Big mistake." Her smirk widened as if I were some punchline. "You've got 30 days. Cowboy, better start packing." But what Sharon didn't know was that I wasn't just the quiet guy on the edge of town. I owned the very lot where their precious HOA clubhouse sat. And the leases? They were due for renewal in 2 weeks. I strolled into that HOA meeting and dropped "And which city in the United States are you watching from?" Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with your HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. New contract on the table, and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "The new rent is triple and I'm reclaiming the HOA's main parking lot. You'll need to find somewhere else to park. Maybe Sharon's driveway." Gasps filled the room. Sharon's face turned ghost. "White?" But that was just the beginning. My name is Matthew Cole, but most people around here just call me Matt. I'm 52, a widower, and a fourth-generation rancher. I live in Willow Creek, Texas, a small town with a big heart, the kind where neighbors bring you pie just because it's Tuesday, and everyone knows who owns what. I never planned to be part of any drama. I just wanted peace and a little space to raise my chickens and breathe fresh air. But that changed the day the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association decided they wanted to clean up the neighborhood. Let me back it up a bit. It all started 6 months before the eviction notice. That's when Sharon Blake first approached me. During one of her friendly visits, she was wearing a pastel pink suit and way too much perfume for a walk across the field. She smiled wide, holding a clipboard. "Hey there, Mr. Cole, just wanted to talk about your fencing. It's rustic." I laughed. "That's a polite way of saying old." She nodded, unbothered. "It doesn't match the community guidelines. We'd really appreciate it if you replaced it with something more modern. Maybe white vinyl, neat, clean, safe." I leaned on the gate and squinted at her. "This isn't a gated community, it's a ranch, that fence." "Has been here longer than you've been alive?" Her smile twitched. "We're trying to raise property values, Mr. Cole." I shook my head. "Then maybe stop building yoga platforms next to the cattle barn." We both laughed, but mine was real. Hers wasn't. That was the first strike. I think next came the letters. Dozens of them, complaints about my rooster crowing too early, about the smell of manure, drifting too close to the HOA pool, about my truck being too loud when I came back from the farmer's market one time. They sent a complaint because my scarecrow looked intimidating to children. I didn't even know how to respond to that one. Still, I kept to myself. I figured they'd get bored and move on. But then Sharon started showing up more. She brought along 2 HOA board members, Tom and Julie, both in their mid-40s, both dressed like they were about to sell you overpriced insurance. They walked my land like it was theirs, pointing at things, whispering, jotting down notes. And then
One day, I noticed sprayed lines cutting across the west side of my ranch, right through my sunflower field. I called the county. Turns out the HOA submitted a request to build a community walking trail that would run through my land. That was the final straw. I drove straight to the county office and got the full map. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. The Willow Creek HOA had no idea. They didn't own the land their office and clubhouse were built on. Years ago, my grandfather had leased it out to them on a quiet 10-year renewable contract, and that contract was set to expire in 60 days. They never paid attention to it, never read the fine print. They just assumed the land came with the job, and that's where it all flipped. I didn't say a word. Instead, I went to see my lawyer, a sharp old lady named Miss Eloise, who had been handling our family's land deals for decades. Together we rewrote the lease agreement. We raised the rent by 300%, put in strict parking regulations, and just for fun added a clause that allowed me to repurpose the parking lot for personal agricultural use if rent wasn't paid on time. And then I waited back to that HOA meeting. Sharon was sitting in her usual spot at the head of the room, all smiles and sparkle, flipping through her agenda when I walked in unannounced.
Matt, she said, clearly annoyed. This meeting is for board members only. I placed the new lease on the table. Then you'll want to read this real carefully. She flipped the first page. Her eyes, scanning her face, went pale. Tom leaned over her shoulder. Wait, this can't be right. Oh, it's right. I said I own the land under this building and your lease expires in 2 weeks. That means you either sign the new contract and pay the new rent or move your HOA operations somewhere else. Sharon's mouth closed. Opened again? Julie whispered. This is extortion, I chuckled. No, this is Texas real estate. And just when the room was starting to spin for them, I dropped the final bomb. I'm also taking over the parking lot starting Monday. It's off limits unless you have a permit, and the only permit comes from me. The room exploded, people shouting, papers rustling, Sharon trying to call for order while visibly sweating through her pink suit. And that's when one of the elderly residents, Mr. Bill from Lot 8, stood
up and said something I'll never forget about time. Someone put y'all in check. That night I sat on my porch with a cold glass of sweet tea, watching the sun dip behind the barn and wondering how they'd try to fight back. I knew Sharon wasn't going to let this go easy, but I didn't expect what came next. 2 nights later, I woke up to headlights outside. A group of men in reflective vests were unloading construction cones at the entrance of my property. They started hammering a wooden sign into the ground. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out. The sign read, HOA property, no entry, trespassers will be reported. Oh, it was on. No, I stared at the sign, my flashlight beam locked on those bold, ridiculous letters, like they had personally insulted me. Oh, property, no entry, trespassers will be reported. They hammered it right into the side of my ranch entrance, like it wasn't even private land, like they had some kind of legal right. I walked up slowly. 4 men were wearing orange vests, one
of them sipping from a thermal mug like it was just another shift. Hey!
I barked. They all froze. Who sent you? I demanded, shining the light in their faces. One of them stepped forward cautiously. We're just contractors, sir. Got an email from Sharon Blake with the HOA. She said this lot was part of the community.
Expansion gave us instructions to place signs and prep for fencing. Fencing, I repeated like I couldn't believe my ears. Yeah, temporary barriers, she said. It'll be used for HOA storage, maybe some garden renovations. I lowered the flashlight slowly
and took a deep breath. You boys got a permit for this? They looked at each other. I didn't think so. I pulled out my phone and called Sheriff Dale, a no-nonsense man with a deep southern drawl and a reputation for settling disputes with one look. He
And I had gone to high school together. Dale, I said when he picked up. Sharon Blake just tried to annex my land in the middle of the night. He showed up 20 minutes later, lights flashing, and he didn't come alone. He brought 2 deputies and a clipboard full of county zoning records. After 10 minutes of talking to the contractors and cross-checking land records, Dale came over and shook his head. They've got nothing. And this sign, he yanked it out with one hand and tossed it to the side. Illegal.
The contractors packed up and left without another word. But Dale wasn't done. You better be ready. Matt, Sharon's digging in deep. She filed a zoning complaint against you with the town council this morning. Claims your ranch violates neighborhood uniformity laws. She's trying to build a case to legally strip your land from the association map. She can try, I muttered. She will, he said, and she'll twist every rule in the book the next few days. Felt like walking on broken glass every morning.
I'd find something.
Knew a citation taped to my barn, a warning stuck to my front door, a drone hovering over my chicken coop. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own land and the neighbors, or they were split folks like Mr. Bill from Lot 8 and the Hernandez couple. From Lot 12 were with me all the way, salt of the earth, people who remembered. When Willow Creek was about community, not committees, but others, they started whispering, Matt's causing trouble, he's too stubborn, he's making things worse for everyone. I'd see them at the local diner, eyes shifting, mouths tightening. Even the waitress Sandy started handing me my coffee without a smile. Still I kept my head high because I had a plan, while Sharon was trying to play dirty politics. I was gathering my own arsenal, paperwork, history, and allies. I met with Miss Eloise again. We're going to need the full title history of this land, I told her. And I want to find every lease agreement, every boundary marker, every right-of-way this HOA has touched. Since they got here, she smiled without looking up. Already ahead of you, darling, I've got a 92-page packet in my trunk. Let's bury them in truth. And we would have done just that, if not for what happened next. It was a Wednesday morning. I woke up early, grabbed my boots and went out to feed the chickens. I hadn't made it 5 steps from my porch when I heard tires on gravel. A red SUV came barreling down the road faster than anyone should be driving. In a residential area, it skidded to a stop. Just outside my gate, Sharon jumped out, followed by Tom and a man in a sharp grey suit holding a briefcase. "Matthew Cole!" she shouted, storming toward me. I didn't say a word. "You're in violation of HOA Code 15.
2, she snapped. We've served you notices, we've filed with the town, and now you're being sued for non-compliance and community disruption. The man in the suit opened the briefcase and handed me a thick stack of papers. Cease and desist, he said.
Immediate removal of all livestock, unauthorized fencing, and get this non-decorative farming equipment visible from the street. I looked at him. You mean my tractor? He nodded like he was delivering a death sentence. I flipped through the paperwork. It was all there. Legal threats, demands, even a court date set in 2 weeks. Sharon folded her arms and smirked. This is the
end of your little cowboy act, Matt. I took a step closer and stared her right in the eyes. You just picked the wrong fight. But inside my gut, twisted, this was bigger than I thought. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were trying to erase
everything I stood for. I spent that night going through every document Miss Eloise had given me, making notes, cross-referencing names, tracing land deals going back 50 years. And that's when I found it. One paragraph, one clause in a dusty old file. From 1986, it was a lease addendum signed by Sharon's own husband, now deceased, that gave my family the right to reclaim any and all utility access points connected through our land if the HOA violated lease terms. And guess what the HOA office depended on for their internet, water and power, a single line running straight through the northeast corner of my field. I smiled. I stood up, grabbed my old cowboy hat and turned off the desk lamp. Let's see how they run their meetings without electricity. The next morning I drove out to the northeast post. I had a padlock in one hand, a wrench in the other. As I reached for the main switch that powered the HOA's office, a black town car pulled up behind me. Out stepped 2 county inspectors and someone I hadn't seen in over 15 years, a former state senator, and he was walking straight toward me. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long golden streaks across the ranch, but the tension in the air was thick and heavy. I stood there, wrench in, hand ready to turn off the very lifeline that kept the HOA clubhouse running. When the car door slammed behind me, Matt Cole, came a deep, polished voice. I turned around slowly. The 2 county inspectors stood back, arms crossed, clearly here on official business, but the man who approached me was wearing a tailored navy suit and glossy black shoes, completely out of place on the dirt trail. It was Senator Charles Harrove. I hadn't seen him since my late wife's funeral, and even then he barely said a word. "Charles," I said, trying to hide my surprise. "Didn't expect to see you out this way." He didn't smile. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a formal injunction," he said, handing it over. "Filed this morning, signed by the county judge." I opened it and scanned quickly. Temporary hold on all land use actions, including cutting utilities. I stared at the signature. Judge Martha Dillard, Sharon's bridge partner. It was all starting to make sense. "You know what this is?" I asked, holding the paper up like it was poison. Charles nodded. "It's politics." He didn't even try to lie about it. I took a step forward. "You siding with her now?" "I'm not siding with anyone, Matt. I'm protecting my investments," he said calmly. "The HOA has donors. They're expanding. They want Willow Creek to be the next suburban paradise in your ranch. It's right in the middle of their plans." I clenched my jaw. "So this is about money?" "It's always about money," he said. "You can fight it if you want, but be smart. Sell the land, take the offer, walk away. Clean." I stared at him, heart pounding. "I'm not selling my legacy." He adjusted his cufflinks, then prepared to lose everything, and with that, he turned around, got into his car, and drove off. The inspector stayed just long enough to post a laminated county seal notice
on the utility post. Before they followed, I was left standing there in the dust, the wrench heavy in my hand. The next few days were some of the lowest I've ever had. I started getting calls from reporters. How does it feel being the face of anti-progress?
One asked another. One ambushed me outside the feed store with a camera crew. I told them they were trespassing. They said Sharon invited them. Then came the mail, fake bills, HOA fines, totaling over $6,000 threats to sue for emotional damage pictures
of my chickens. With evidence tags taped on them one morning, I walked outside to find someone had spray painted Hick Farm out across my barn doors. And still I didn't back down, Miss Eloise, and I worked late nights. We gathered every shred of evidence.
We got signed statements from neighbors, pulled zoning maps and uncovered every shady deal the HOA ever touched. But I knew paperwork alone wasn't enough. I needed to turn the community, so I hosted a block gathering. It wasn't a fancy gala like Sharon loved to throw. No wine glasses or catered finger foods, just pulled pork sandwiches, sweet tea, and hay bales to sit on. I invited everyone, whether they supported me or not, and to my surprise, they came. Mr. Bill brought homemade cornbread. The Hernandez kids played tag in the pasture. Even Sandy from the diner brought a peach cobbler and apologized for giving me the cold shoulder. That night, I stood up on an old crate and told them the truth. The HOA doesn't want to protect this neighborhood. They want to own it, they want to control it. I'm not fighting them just for me. I'm fighting for all of us, because if they take my ranch today, your backyard might be next. The crowd clapped. I could feel the tide shifting. But Sharon wasn't done. The very next morning, a sheriff's deputy delivered a final eviction notice, not for my home, but for the parking lot that the HOA still hadn't paid rent on, according to the letter they were claiming. Squatters' rights. I almost laughed. They wanted to reverse it on me, so I did the only thing I knew would get their attention. I fenced off the entire lot overnight. Barbed wire, wooden posts, a big red sign. Private property. No parking violators will be towed. And oh boy, they came unhinged. The next HOA meeting was chaos. People were parked 3 streets away. Sharon showed up in heels and nearly twisted her ankle trying to walk across my field. Tom tried to remove the wire and got caught on it. Julie, she called the cops again, but this time the cops didn't take their side. Sheriff Dale simply looked at the documents I handed him and said, "Looks legal to me." That night, Sharon's group tried to stage a counterattack. I heard the engines before I saw them. 2 landscaping trucks pulling into the lot just outside the fence. One had a bulldozer. The plan was obvious: tear the fence down and take the space back by force. But what they didn't know was I had been recording everything, every text, every voicemail, every drone, flyover, every forged citation. And just before the bulldozer reached the first post, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled in front of it. County marshals. I had filed an emergency injunction the day before, and one based on my recorded evidence. The driver was ordered out. The trucks were seized, and Sharon, she was served with charges of harassment, property damage, conspiracy, and unlawful use
Of public resources, she screamed. I didn't say a word, I just watched her face as she was handed her court summons. But as the marshals packed up the vehicles and neighbors gathered to watch, a man in a beige suit stepped out from a silver car that
had been parked quietly nearby. He wore a city official badge. He walked right up to me and said, "Mr. Cole, you may have stopped the HOA, but the city, we're looking to claim this entire area for redevelopment." And just like that, I realized the battle wasn't over. It was only getting bigger. The man in the beige suit was calm too. Calm, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and handed me a formal-looking envelope notice of intent to rezone. It read, "This isn't a threat," he added. "It's a city initiative. Willow Creek is on the list of high-priority development zones. For 2025, we've had investors from Austin and Dallas already scouting tech hubs, residential estates, maybe even a golf resort. Your ranch happens to sit right in the proposed greenbelt." I opened the envelope and skimmed through it. There it was, clear as day, a detailed plan to rezone the land from agricultural to mixed-use development. Essentially, the city's way of saying, "We'll buy you out or force you out." I looked up at him. "This land's been a ranch since 1892, he nodded. "And things change." He gave a polite smile, nodded once more, and walked away like it was just another Tuesday. No fanfare, no conscience. I stood, frozen. First the HOA, now the city. I wasn't just fighting petty neighbors anymore. I was up against real estate giants, local politics, and corporate money. When I got back inside the house, Miss Eloise was already waiting for me with stacks of paperwork. She raised a brow. "You look like you saw a ghost." Handed her the envelope. She read it quietly, then slowly placed it on the table and folded her hands. "We're going to war." The following week was a whirlwind of legal filings, community meetings, and late-night phone calls. I began gathering every historical document tied to my land. Turns out my grandfather had registered part of the ranch as a heritage property. Decades ago, it wasn't enough to stop development alone, but it gave us a legal foundation to stand on. We also dug deeper into city zoning. Laws, that's when Eloise found a golden thread buried in a 1979 municipal clause, was a line that read, "Any privately owned parcel containing more than 15 acres and operated as an active agricultural entity for over 40 years shall be deemed a protected working land not subject to forced reason zoning without a public referendum." That meant the city couldn't legally force me to sell without putting the decision to a public vote. But there was a catch. The city had already started posting misleading notices telling residents the reason zoning was a done deal, trying to pressure them into support before a vote even happened. I had to stop them, so I did something bold. I ran for town council. Now I'm no politician. I wear flannel shirts and mud-caked boots. I speak plain, and I don't sugarcoat. But I had something the city boys didn't. The truth. With help from Mr. Bill the Hernandez family, and even Sandy from the diner, we kicked off a grassroots campaign. We printed flyers, we held barbecues, we organized town halls under the stars right on my land, and we told everyone the same thing: this isn't about a ranch. This is about keeping Willow Creek from being swallowed by cement. Soon the whispers started turning into cheers. People began pulling their support from the HOA. Sharon's power crumbled like stale cornbread. Her board members began resigning one by one, but Sharon wasn't going quietly. She arranged a televised debate. It aired on the local public access channel, and I'll admit she came in sharp, dressed in her power suit, clutching a clipboard full of statistics and flashy graphics. She went first. The HOA has improved property values, reduced crime, made Willow Creek desirable, but we can't let outdated land stand in the way of progress. Mr. Cole's ranch belongs in a museum. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium in my denim jacket, held up a photo of my late wife planting flowers beside our barn, and said, "This land has fed families, raised generations, sheltered veterans and widows. You want progress, build around us, but don't erase us." The room went silent, and then it exploded in applause. By the time I stepped off the stage, I knew I had won something, even if it wasn't the election yet. But I didn't know Sharon still had one more trick up her sleeve. 2 nights later, just after 2 today,
I was woken by the loud crack of tires tearing through gravel, then a flash of orange, then smoke. I ran out and saw it. My barn was on fire. Flames shot up into the sky like a screaming torch. The scent of burning hay and wood filled the air. My
animals cried from their pens. I called 911 and then grabbed a hose, spraying wherever I could. The fire department came fast, but not fast enough. By sunrise, the barn was a blackened skeleton of what it used to be. All my tools, my supplies, even the saddle my father gave me, it was gone. Neighbors gathered, some offered help. Others cried. Sheriff Dale walked up quietly. "Matt, I'm sorry, look me in the eye. This wasn't an accident. There were gas cans behind the structure. Someone lit it on purpose. Did you find anything else?" He handed me a charred piece of plastic, what looked like a corner of a HOA visitor badge. My fists clenched. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was personal, and I was done playing defense. It was time to strike back.
hard. I stood there staring at the scorched earth where my barn once stood. My heart pounded, not just with anger, but with something deeper: betrayal. My barn wasn't just a building, it was history. It was where I proposed to my wife, where my boy took
His first steps, where generations of coal-stored feed, saddles and memories. Now it was gone, and someone wanted me to break, but they underestimated me. Sheriff Dale promised to investigate, but we both knew how these things went. There'd be report, delays, maybe even a name or two, whispered behind closed doors, but no justice, not unless I made my own, so I got to work. First, I called Miss Eloise. She was furious, spitting out legal options like bullets. This is arson, Matt. I don't care who they...
No, this is jail time. I'm not just looking to jail anyone. I said I want to end this. And that's when the idea came to me. If they were willing to burn down my barn to make a point, I was going to buy the very ground they stood on to bury theirs.
Over the years, I'd saved every penny that didn't go back into the ranch, not because I was frugal, but because after my wife passed, money didn't mean much anymore. I never remarried, never traveled, just worked, ate, and slept. But now I had purpose. I met with a private real estate agent. I trusted Chuck Renner, a man who once offered to buy a slice of my backfield for cash. Chuck, I said, I need to know who owns the lots behind the HOA clubhouse, those 3 parcels the board uses for extra storage. He raised a brow. You want to buy them? I want to own everything. Touching their clubhouse quietly. Turns out those lots were still privately owned by an older couple who had no love for Sharon's board. With Chuck's help, I made offers they couldn't refuse, and they didn't. Within 2 weeks, I owned every parcel of land adjacent to the HOA building. And then I did the unthinkable. I built a pop-up feed store and animal rescue shelter right beside their fence line. It was completely legal, completely functional, and completely infuriating to Sharon. Imagine hosting an HOA brunch while a rooster crows next door and kids are adopting goats out back. Every Saturday, I offered free tours I gave local families. Fresh eggs. I hosted Build Your Own Birdhouse. Workshops, the community loved it, and guess who I hired to work there? The very neighbors Sharon had fined, bullied, and ignored over the years. Tom, her former board member, was now handing out hay bales and laughing like a man reborn. Julie, she came by with a teenage daughter just to volunteer. Bit by bit, Sharon's empire crumbled, but she wasn't finished one afternoon while I was helping a young boy bottle feed a lamb. Chuck called me in a panic. Matt, you need to see this. He emailed over a scanned document. It was a petition for emergency eminent domain. The city had filed it. They were trying to seize not just the HOA land, but mine too. They claimed my structures were temporary and obstructive, and that the area had high redevelopment
value. If granted, they'd have full authority to bulldoze it all my work, all my family's legacy erased. And the hearing was set for 7 days. Later, I felt sick, but I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I mobilized that week. We organized the largest petition Willow Creek had ever seen, over 2,400 signatures. Local media outlets picked up the story Rancher versus HOA David fights Goliath in Willow Creek. Showdown people I didn't even know started showing up to help young couples, veterans, farmers from the next county. Someone painted a huge mural of my barn with the words, "You can burn the barn, but you can't kill the roots." The mural went viral online. Even a few state representatives chimed in, demanding an inquiry into the HOA's tactics in the city's rezoning agenda. By the time the hearing day arrived, the town council chamber was packed, wall to wall. Sharon walked in wearing her signature pink suit, flanked by 2 lawyers and Charles Hargrove himself. I came in with dirt on my boots, a folder of evidence, and Miss Eloise at my side. The judge, surprisingly, was not Martha Dillard. She had recused herself after complaints of bias. The new judge was younger, sharper, and curious. "What exactly is this property to you, Mr. Cole?" she asked. During the hearing, I stood up, held out a faded photo of my wife beside the barn, and said, "It's my past, my home, and my promise to everyone who's ever loved this land. I'm not standing Here because I hate development. I'm standing here because some things are worth protecting.
The room fell silent. Then the judge leaned back in her chair and said, "Petition denied the city had lost, the HOA had lost, and Sharon." She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, because just as she stood to leave, a uniformed officer approached her with a small envelope. "Sharon Blake, you're being investigated for fraud, harassment, and property sabotage." Her eyes widened. What I didn't smile, I just tipped my hat, because justice wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure they never tried it again. But as I stepped outside, finally free, finally victorious, a neighbor came rushing toward me, breathless. "Matt, you've got to come quick. It's the rescue barn." "What about it?" "There's a man inside. Says he has a deal for you, and he's offering
More money than I've ever.
seen." I blinked. More money. I walked toward the barn, unsure what I'd find, and standing there by the hoft was a man in a silk shirt and a Rolex, holding a briefcase full of cash. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I represent a group out of Silicon Valley. We want to buy your ranch name, your price." And just like that, it wasn't just the HOA or the city anymore. It was the world. The man in the silk shirt stood calmly by the hoft, like he belonged there, like his shiny shoes weren't caked in mud from the pasture, or his designer cologne wasn't battling the scent of goats and hay. He smiled. "Let's skip the small talk. Mr. Cole, my clients want this land, all of it. The ranch, the feed store, the old burned barn, even that stretch of sunflower field near the creek." I crossed my arms. "Not for sale." He chuckled lightly and opened the silver briefcase. It was full, neatly stacked bundles of cash, and a printed contract clipped on top. "Will start at $5 million, he said. "That's just the first offer. You'll never have to fix another fence post again." I didn't even blink. "You think money is enough to take away a man's roots?" His smile tightened. "I think everyone has a price, even men like you." I turned, slowly motioning toward the pasture beyond the barn, where two little girls were feeding baby goats under the watch of their mother. "You see them?" I asked. "They've been here every Saturday since we opened. That little girl with the glasses, she was afraid of animals 2 weeks ago. Now she wants to be a vet." "So?" he replied coolly. "So," I said, "this land is doing something. It's healing people, bringing neighbors together, that's worth more than
All the tech campuses in the world." He closed the briefcase and gave one last warning. "You're standing in the way of billions. You'll get tired." Mr. Cole, they always do. Then he walked out, leaving the scent of greed behind him. Later that evening, I
sat alone on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee and the contract still in my hand. Miss Eloise called. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, "just thinking you're not considering it." "Oh, you know," I said, "but I want to know who's behind it." She was already ahead of me. "It's a conglomerate called West Ridge Holdings. They're buying up rural properties across the country, disguised under shell corporations. They don't care about your history. They care about flipping farmland into smart communities and selling condos to billionaires from Silicon Valley. Then we fight." I said. She sighed. "Matt, they don't play fair. You've already burned their first messenger. They'll come back with lawyers, loopholes, zoning tricks, everything they've got. Let them." And they did. The next week was a brutal storm of legal maneuvers. They flooded the town with sleek flyers promising future-forward living, complete with artificial lakes, community gyms, and rooftop cafes. They even offered homeowners in Willow Creek buyout bonuses. To support rezoning, Sharon, freshly disgraced and quiet, re-emerged suddenly with new backing. She started showing up to HOA meetings again, now rebranded as a community consultant for Westridge Holdings. Her job, persuade locals that I was standing in the way of their future. She handed out gift baskets, organized free yoga classes, even held vision board nights where people could paste pictures of their dream homes onto posters and talk about how amazing Willow Creek could become. It worked. Some neighbours started wavering. Maybe it's time to move forward, one said. Matt, stuck in the past. I felt like I was losing them until the incident at the creek. It was a Friday morning. When I found the damage, the old wooden bridge leading across. My sunflower field had been sawed halfway through, nails pulled, planks cracked. If a child had stepped on it, they'd have gone straight into the ravine below. I immediately called the sheriff. Looks like sabotage, Dale muttered again, but this time we had more than guesses. Just a mile down the road, Deputy Evans had pulled over a U-Haul van abandoned behind the Baptist church inside construction. Tools and a backpack with Sharon Blake's initials embroidered on it. That was the final push. I called an emergency town meeting. The church hall was packed. Some were curious, some were defensive, some just wanted answers. I stepped to the front and
held up 2 photos, one of the burned barn, the other of the broken bridge. And then I said this: every time we say no to outsiders, they don't back off. They attack. First, they tried to buy me out, then they tried to scare me out. Now they're putting
your kids at risk just to force a vision that doesn't belong here. I pointed toward a little girl in the front row, the same girl from the goat pen. If that bridge had collapsed, she could have been hurt, or worse, all for what? Rooftop cafes, fibre, optic dreams. The room went quiet. Then one by one, people began to stand up and say, no, no to the buyouts, no to Sharon, no to the corporate takeovers. By the end of the night, we had a community pledge, over 500 signatures swearing to preserve Willow Creek's identity and oppose all rezoning until a full public vote. Miss Eloise filed it with the county. The next day, it was official. Westridge would need 80% approval to continue any development, and they were still far from that number. But Sharon wasn't done scheming. The very next morning, I received a certified letter. It was a summon for a new lawsuit. They were claiming that I had fraudulently purchased the land adjacent to the HOA clubhouse that I had misled the previous owners into selling, and they demanded all my titles be revoked. If they won this case, not only would I lose my feed store, I'd lose every piece of land I used to stop them. And the court date, it was set for 2 weeks later. On the exact day, my wife and I would have celebrated our 30th anniversary. I looked out across the field that night, the wind brushing through the tall grass, and whispered, I'm not backing down, honey, not now, not ever. But deep inside, I feared this time they might win the days leading up to the court. Hearing felt like walking through fog with a weight on my chest. I barely slept. My appetite vanished every time I closed my eyes. I saw my wife's smile, my burned barn, and that cold smirk on Sharon's face, but I wasn't alone anymore. Willow Creek had rallied. Every day someone stopped by the ranch to drop off cookies, offer a prayer, or just say, we're with you, Matt. And the feed store stayed busy. Volunteers helped rebuild the barn frame, with salvaged wood. Kids played in the field like it was their backyard. It gave me hope, but I knew one misstep in court could cost me everything. 2 nights before the hearing, Miss Eloise called me late. Matt, I need you to come over. I drove over, fast, boots still muddy, heart pounding. She opened the door with a rare smile. I found something, she said, handing me a dusty manila envelope from her old filing cabinet. Inside was a handwritten letter from none other than Sharon's husband. God rest his soul, it was addressed to my father and dated 1989. In it, he personally acknowledged the family's full rights to the adjacent parcels and renounced any future claim from the HOA in his own handwriting, with his signature witnessed and notarized. I stared at it, stunned. Why didn't we see this earlier? Eloise grinned because I had it filed under personal correspondence and forgot all about it. But guess what? Personal letters become legal evidence if notarized, and this one is airtight. It was our silver bullet. I finally slept that night the morning of the trial. The courthouse lobby buzzed like a beehive. Reporters lined the steps. Local news vans parked across the street. It had become the most talked about land case in our county's history. Sharon arrived first, dressed in sleek grey, her chin high, flanked by two corporate attorneys from Westridge. Holdings Charles Harrove followed close behind, pretending not to know her, but clearly in on the game. Then I walked in, old boots, tucked, shirt rolled up, sleeves, Miss Eloise at my side in her signature turquoise suit with files tucked under both arms. The judge, same one from before, wasted no time. The Westridge lawyer stood first. He launched into a well-rehearsed speech about fraudulent land transfers, abuse of elder sellers, and exploitation of property law. They claimed I coerced the owners of the adjacent lots, that I used emotional manipulation, that I pretended to be buying for agricultural purposes only to disrupt the HOA. I kept my mouth shut. Then the judge turned to us, defense. Eloise stood calm, composed. Then she walked slowly to the evidence table and laid down the handwritten letter. "Your
Honor," she said, "this isn't just a letter. It's a legal document signed and notarized by the HOA president, at the time Sharon Blake's own husband, acknowledging that the parcels in question do not and never will belong to the HOA." She let the silence hang. Furthermore, she continued, "We have purchase contracts, audio recordings from the sellers confirming they sold willingly, and city maps showing the HOA had no jurisdiction over those plots." The judge took a long moment reading everything. Then he looked up. "The court finds no evidence of fraud. In fact, it finds this lawsuit to be frivolous and retaliatory." He turned to Sharon's lawyers. "Case dismissed. And unless your clients want sanctions, I suggest they stop wasting this court's time." The gavel hit wood. It was over, and I had won. The courthouse steps felt like a victory parade. Neighbors cheered, reporters swarmed. Someone handed me a bouquet of sunflowers, the same ones that once grew by the creek. But as the celebration swirled around me, I saw Sharon standing off to the side. Alone, her suit was perfect, her posture proud, but her eyes empty. She stared at me with a mix of disbelief and quiet rage. Then she walked down the steps, pushed through the crowd, and disappeared. I never saw her again. Rumors say she moved to Houston. Others say she filed for bankruptcy after Westridge cut her loose. Honestly, I didn't care. She had spent years trying to erase me. But in the end, it was her who faded a year later. The ranch was fully restored. The barn stood taller than before, painted bright red with white trim, and a small wooden plaque near the door that read, "For Ellie always." The feed store became a permanent co-op managed by locals. We raised enough money to build a learning center for school kids to come and interact with the animals, and the sunflower field. It bloomed again, thicker, brighter, and taller than ever. People came from all over Texas just to see it. One afternoon, as I walked along the edge of the field with Sheriff Dale, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You know what the town calls this place now?" he asked. I raised a brow. "The heart of Willow Creek," I smiled. "Not bad for a stubborn old rancher, huh? I tell this story now not to brag, not to gloat, but to remind you of something. No matter how much money they throw at you, no matter how big their buildings or loud their voices, no matter how hard they try to bury you, you don't bow, you stand, you protect what matters, because when your roots run deep enough, even a fire can't burn you down. Now tell me, where are you watching from, and would you have stood your ground too?"